Okay, back in our study, Silas, this is episode 5. If Luke wrote all these books, then Paul needs a new physician. So we've got a couple of loose ends we want to tidy up here. In some previous videos, I mentioned we would answer a few questions. One, are Silas and Luke the same person? Two, what's the significance of Peter mentioning Silas or Silvanus at the end of First Peter? And finally, did Silas write Hebrews? We're going to tackle these real quick, not going to get into too much detail. So first one, are Silas and Luke the same person? The answer is no. I think that was everyone's default position if you had watched any of the videos, but we might as well investigate it. So, yes, people get name changes in the Bible, but to get both a name change and an occupation change is highly unlikely. And if that occupation change is from a prophet to a physician, it's even less likely. A physician, we're talking about a lifelong worth of study. So, Luke, the beloved physician, is not Silas, the prophet. Silas is also called a leading man. So a leading man and a prophet does not become a physician. So no chance. So Silas and Luke are most likely not the same person. Item number 2 here, we got 1 Peter 5:12. At the end of the letter, Peter says, by Silvanus, our faithful brother, as I consider him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting you and testifying that this is the true grace of God in which you stand. So what does this tell us about Silas? Well, at a minimum, it tells us that Silas writes stuff. That's what prophets do. And a reminder here, God typically uses prophets, not physicians, to write stuff. This was God's method in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Think how many Old Testament books were written by prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, etc., etc. Here, New Testament, I don't think there's any reason to think that God would change his method. It's the prophets that he uses. So we have a little bonus here coming off of First Peter. The book of James has a quote here in James 3:5. It says, see how great a forest a little fire kindles. And a little trivia here, Silas in the Greek, in the original language, it means forest. And this is the only New Testament reference to the word forest. And I might be going on a limb here, but as a stretch here, first of all, First Peter and James, they're extremely similar letters. If you were to read them back to back, you might say to yourself, this sounds very similar, maybe not as much as Ephesians and Colossians, but it's right there, the length, the topic, and it uses some of the exact same Old Testament references. And it seems that some parts of the book are just cut and paste from First Peter to James. I do not think this is a coincidence. And perhaps using the word forest here, again, the only time in the New Testament is either James's or Silas's way of putting Silas's signature on the letter. Again, I don't know, you can test that. So, final question. Did Silas write Hebrews, or could we say, did he pen it? In my opinion, yes. That doesn't answer all the questions about Hebrews because there's still a mystery. Was Paul alive and was he with Silas when it was written? I have no idea. I mean, sometimes it speaks in the plural at the end of Hebrews, and sometimes he speaks in the singular. So that's still a question. But again, David L. Allen's book, which we mentioned in the first study in this series here, Lukan Authorship of Hebrews, he does a masterful job, I think, of showing, looking at linguistically and all the similarities between the letters, that the same person who wrote the third gospel in the book of Acts also wrote Hebrews. I'm thankful for David L. Allen's book. He's also the guy that brought up this, the theory that Josiah Condor had brought up earlier that we talked about. He was the first person that, at least that David Allen talks about, who had this idea that you can tie Silas to the we statements in the book of Acts, which is what got us starting on this. So I'm thankful for that. But I'm super disappointed that David L. Allen didn't go all in on Silas as the author. He bails out and says, oh, he still thinks that Luke wrote the book of Acts. And again, I think he kind of missed it there, but at the same time, thankful that he brought it to our attention, brought that to light. So conclusion, third gospel, book of Acts, First Peter, James, Hebrews, Thessalonian letters, etc. If Luke spent all his time to write all of these books, then I think Paul needs a new physician. You know, if I have a doctor, I want him studying doctor stuff. All the time it would have taken an author to write more than half of the New Testament books. Again, fortunately, we can see that Silas, the prophet, is the one who is behind all of these letters. I hope you enjoyed that study. And as always, any questions, comments, let me know. And until next time, contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. And God bless.